Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Tonight, there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. You can let your shoulders drop away from your ears, let the weight of the day settle into the bed beneath you, and just listen. We are going to spend some slow hours together with the story of one man, a monk who lived a very long time ago, who may have sat facing a wall for 9 years, and whose face you have almost certainly seen, even if you never knew his name. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to be here. You do not need to remember a single thing I say. There will be no test in the morning, no thread to hold on to. If your mind drifts off somewhere in the middle of all this, that is exactly what it is supposed to do. The words will still be here, going on quietly in the dark, and you can rejoin them whenever you like or not at all. Before we begin, if you feel like it, you might leave a small note in the comments, just what time it is where you are and what the room looks like tonight, whether the window is dark or there is a lamp still on, whether it is raining somewhere far off or perfectly still. There are people all over the world settling in to listen right now in cities you will never see, and it is a gentle thing to imagine them there with you, each one lying down at the end of their own long day. So take a slow, deep breath, let it out even slower, and let yourself sink in. Thank you for joining us here at Relaxing Subjects. Let us begin. I want to start with the oldest piece of paper, because here is the strange and lovely thing about the man we are going to spend tonight with. Almost everyone has heard a version of his story. The fierce monk who stared at a wall until his shadow burned into the stone. The teacher who told a great emperor to his face that all his good deeds were worth nothing. The founder of Kung Fu. The man who cut off his own eyelids so he would not fall asleep. You may have one of these pictures in your mind already, soft and half-remembered. The way you remember a story someone told you a long time ago. And almost none of it is in the oldest record we have of him. The oldest record is a book with a long and beautiful name. It is called The Record of the Buddhist Monasteries of Luoyang. In its own language, it is the Luoyang Kielan Ji. It was written by a man named Yang Xuanji, and it was finished around the year 547. That is decades after Bodhidharma is supposed to have died. Now hold that lightly. 547. We will come back to that number more than once tonight, the way you come back to a landmark on a walk you have taken before. Yang Xuanji was not setting out to write a life of Bodhidharma. He was writing about a city and about its temples and about how all of that beauty had been lost. He simply happened to mention an old foreign monk in passing, the way you might mention a stranger you once saw at a railway station who said something you never forgot. And what he wrote was this. There was a tower in the city of Luoyang. It belonged to a temple called Yongning, the Temple of Eternal Peace. And at its heart stood a pagoda, a tall, tiered tower that was the wonder of its age. Gold and jewels. Bells hung at every corner that rang when the wind moved. People said you could see the gleam of it from miles away across the plain. It was the kind of thing built by an empire at the very height of its confidence, when it believes it will last forever. And we will see before tonight is over that it did not last forever at all. But on the day in the story, it was still standing, still blazing in the sun, and before it stood an old monk from somewhere far to the west. Yang Xuanzi calls him a monk of the western region. He uses a word, a bossi, that points toward Persia, toward the lands that today we might call Central Asia, somewhere out along the old roads where the deserts are. And this old monk looked up at the golden tower, and he said that he was 150 years old. He said he had traveled through many countries, that there was nowhere he had not been, and that in all of that wandering across all of those lands, he had never once seen anything so beautiful as this. And then The record says he pressed his palms together the way you do in prayer, and he chanted, Nama, Nama, a sound of reverence, of homage, of letting go. And he stood there like that, palms together, chanting for days. That is all. I want you to sit with how small that is, how quiet. There is no wall in it. There is no Shaolin monastery, no 9 years, no emperor, no severed arm, no eyelids on the ground, no kung fu, no shadow burned into stone. There is only a very old foreign monk far from home, looking up at something beautiful and human, and being moved by it, and pressing his hands together. The man at the root of one of the fiercest legends in the world appears, in the oldest record we have, as someone tender, someone who could still be amazed, someone who had seen everything and was still able to stand for days in front of a golden tower and simply say, how beautiful, how beautiful. And here is the gentle, important thing I want to give you to carry into sleep, the thing the whole night will turn around. The legend did not come first. The man came first, and the legend grew after him. It grew slowly over hundreds of years, story by story, the way moss grows over a stone in a forest until you can no longer see the stone at all, only the soft green shape of it. The wall, the emperor, the eyelids, every one of those famous scenes was added later by people who loved him, by lineages of monks who needed a founder to point back to. None of that makes the legend false in the way a lie is false. It makes it something else, something more like a candle that more and more people kept lighting, each adding their own small flame until the whole shape of the man was glowing in the dark. So that is the first thing we are doing tonight. We are going to honor the legend, all of it, the wall and the snow and the single sandal, because it is beautiful and because there is real wisdom folded inside it. But we are also going to be honest with each other about which parts are old and which parts are new, which parts a careful person can stand on, and which parts are the soft green moss. And I promise you that honesty will not spoil anything. It does the opposite. It lets you love the story more, the way you can love a grandmother's tales more, not less, once you understand that she was telling you something true about life even when the wolf could not really talk. There is nothing to be sorted out tonight. We are only going to walk slowly through it together and see what is what. Now, if the man came first and the legend grew after him, then we have to ask the obvious quiet question. Who was he, really? And here is where the story does something I find strangely comforting. It refuses to tell us cleanly, even his homeland. The most basic fact you could ask of a person, where are you from? Even that does not hold still, because the second oldest record disagrees with the first. There is another book, written about 100 years after Yang Xuanji's. It was completed around the year 645. There, another landmark, 645. Lay it down beside 547, and you have the two oldest witnesses we will ever have. This second book is called The Continued Biographies of Eminent Monks. In its own language, the Shu Gaoseng Zhuan. It was put together by a monk named Daoxuan, a careful and serious man whose job, in a sense, was to gather up the lives of the great teachers and write them down before they were forgotten. And Daoxuan gives Bodhidharma a short biography, a real one. And in it, something has already changed. In the older record from 547, the monk is Persian, a man of the western region, out along the desert roads. But in Daoxuan's biography 100 years later, he has become something different. Now he is a South Indian Brahmin. Now he comes from the very south of India, from the priestly class. And some later tellings will even make him a prince, a king's son who gave up a throne. And he no longer arrives across the deserts of the West. He arrives by sea on the long ocean route that ran from India around to the coast of China, Persian by land in the oldest book, South Indian by sea in the next one. Now you might be tempted to ask which is true and to feel a little frustrated that nobody can simply tell you, but I would like to invite you tonight to feel something else instead. Feel how human that uncertainty is. This is not a flaw in the story. This is the story being honest about its own age. We are looking back across nearly 1,500 years through hundreds of hands that copied and recopied and remembered and slightly misremembered, all of them trying their best. And the very first thing we reach for, where was he from, comes back to us doubled, two answers, gently contradicting each other in the two oldest documents we have. The man is already, from the very beginning, a little out of focus. A figure seen through morning mist. And there is something restful in accepting that. We do not have to pin him down. We do not have to make him solid. Some of the most important people who ever lived come down to us this way, soft at the edges, more shape than face, and we love them anyway. Perhaps we love them more for it. Let us stay a moment longer with his name, because his name traveled even further than he did, and the journey of it is one of the quietest, prettiest threads in the whole story. In the records we have been speaking of, he is Bodhidharma. Two old words from the Indian languages joined together. Bodhi, which means awakening, the moment of waking up, of opening the eyes of the mind, of seeing clearly what was there all along. And Dharma, which is a word so large it almost cannot be carried in English, but which holds inside it the teaching, the law, the way things truly are. So his name means, roughly, the awakening teaching, the Dharma of enlightenment. A man named after the very thing he was said to carry from one country to another, like a man named after the lamp he was holding. And then, watch what happens to that name as it moves. When it reaches China, the Chinese ear and the Chinese tongue reshape it, the way every language reshapes a foreign name to fit its own mouth. Bodhidharma becomes Bodhidharma. And because that is a long thing to say, day after day, year after year, in the monasteries, the people who loved him did what people always do with a name they say often. They shortened it. They wore it smooth like a coin handled for generations, like a child's nickname for someone they see every morning. Bodhidharma became simply Damo, 2 syllables, almost a breath. And so the great patriarch in much of China is just Damo, the way someone enormous in your own life might be just a single, soft word to you. Then the name crosses the sea again, eastward, to Japan. And the Japanese ear takes Damo and turns it once more, and there he becomes Daruma. Hold on to that name, Daruma, because near the end of all this, after the wall and the snow and the empty tomb, that name is going to come back and surprise you. It is going to turn into something round and red and smiling that you may have on a shelf in your own home without ever having known you were looking at the same man we are meeting tonight at the foot of a golden tower. And the name keeps going. In Korea, he is Dalma. In Vietnam, he is Bodhidharma, the old Indian word, carried whole, dressed in new sounds. One man, one name, meaning awakening. And it rolls out across the whole eastern half of the world, changing its clothes in every country. Bodhidharma, Damo, Daruma, Dalma, Bodhidharma, the way a single melody can be hummed in a dozen languages and stay underneath the same tune. There is something deeply restful in that, I think, as you lie there in the dark. A name softening and softening as it passes from mouth to mouth across centuries and oceans, and never quite losing what it meant. The awakening, the waking up, carried gently all that way. So let us gather what we have before we go on, so that none of it weighs on you. The oldest record, from 547, written by Yang Xuanzi, an old foreign monk, perhaps Persian, claiming to be 150, standing palms pressed before a golden tower, chanting Nama for days and nothing more. The next record, from 645, written by Daoxuan, now a South Indian Brahmin, arriving by sea. A name that means the Dharma of enlightenment, wearing itself smooth across a dozen tongues, and the one quiet truth that holds all of it together. The man came first, and the legend grew after him. Which brings us gently to the open door we are going to leave standing all night. Because if the oldest record we have shows none of the famous story, no wall, no 9 years, no Shaolin, no shadow in the stone, then where did all of it come from? Where did the wall come from? You have the image already, almost everyone does. The lone figure seated before a blank cliff of stone, unmoving year after year, through 9 winters, until the rock itself remembers the shape of him. It is one of the most powerful images in all of religion. And yet it is simply not there in the first telling. It is not in Yang Xuanzi. So somewhere between that old monk admiring a golden tower and the towering wall-gazing patriarch we think we know, something happened. The wall arrived. The 9 years arrived. The cave on the mountain arrived. And we are going to follow that slowly and find out exactly when each piece appeared and why someone needed it to be there. I will tell you now, just so the question can rest easy in you and not nag, the wall does come. It comes in stages. A faint version of it is already there in Daoxuan's biography from 645, but not as a literal staring contest with a slab of stone. It comes as a kind of instruction for the mind, a way of being still, and we will sit with what that really means a little later when you are even further into the quiet. And the full cinematic version, the 9 years, the Shaolin monastery on its famous mountain, the shadow burned into the rock, that does not lock into place until a book written around the year 1004, 500 years after the man is supposed to have lived. 5 centuries of monks and storytellers, each adding a little, until the wall stood as solid in everyone's mind as if they had seen it themselves. But we are not there yet. I only want you to hold the question loosely, the way you might hold a smooth stone in your palm as you fall asleep, not gripping it, just feeling its weight. If the earliest record shows no wall, where did 9 years of wall gazing come from? We will answer it. There is no hurry. The answer will come the way sleep comes, a little at a time, without you having to chase it. And here, I think, is the deeper comfort underneath all of this, the thing I most want to leave with you in these first slow minutes. We tend to believe, in the bright middle of the day, that a story is only worth something if every part of it is literally, provably true. That if a scene was added later, it is somehow a cheat, a disappointment, something to be embarrassed about. But that is not how human beings have ever actually lived with their most precious stories. The people who added the wall, the people who added the 9 years, were not con men. They were not trying to fool you. They were reaching across the silence the real man left behind for a way to say something true that plain facts could not hold. They were saying, here was a person so still, so committed, so unwilling to look away from the truth, that it was as if he could sit before a wall for 9 years and not flinch. The wall is not a lie about his life. It is a poem about his depth. And we are going to be able to feel both of those things at once tonight, the history and the poem, without one spoiling the other, the way you can know that a sunset is only light bending through dust and still find it almost unbearably beautiful. So that is our promise to each other for the hours ahead. We will be honest, gently, never harshly, about what is old and what is new, what a careful person can lean on, and what is the soft green moss grown over the stone. And we will let the legend stay beautiful. We will not tear it down. We will only hold it up to the light and turn it slowly so you can see how it was made and love it more for understanding it. For now, let us pause here for a moment. There is no rush to go on. Take a slow, deep breath all the way down and let it out as if you were setting something heavy on the floor beside the bed. Notice how the room has gone a little softer around you since we started. Notice your own weight, held by the mattress, asking nothing of you. You do not have to remember Yang Xuanji. You do not have to remember the dates. If all that stays with you is the picture of an old monk looking up at a golden tower, palms pressed together, amazed after 150 years that the world can still be beautiful, that is more than enough. Let the rest drift. And when you are ready, with no effort at all, we will go on together, and we will walk slowly toward the wall. Let us go back just for a breath to that golden tower, because there is one more thing inside it worth carrying with us. And it has to do with how legends are born, which is the real subject under all of this. The Yongning Pagoda, the Temple of Eternal Peace. Think of the name, eternal, built by an empire at the very top of its strength, gold at every joint, bells at every corner, singing in the wind, visible for miles, the kind of thing you raise when you are certain, absolutely certain, that your world will go on forever. And that is precisely the world Bodhidharma is said to have walked into. A confident, temple-building, sutra-copying world where holiness was something you could measure. In towers raised, in monks fed, in scriptures gilded, a world that believed you could count your way toward heaven. I tell you this now because everything strange and bracing about the man we are following sits in contrast to that golden tower. The empire measured. He, in the stories that grew up around him, refused to measure. The empire built. He sat still. The empire copied scriptures by the thousand, beautiful and endless. And the tradition that would claim him as its founder would one day call itself, with a kind of quiet defiance, a teaching passed on outside the scriptures, not resting on words and letters at all. Picture that for a moment, the sheer nerve of it, a whole school of seekers standing in the shadow of all those gilded towers full of holy books and saying, "The thing we are after cannot be put in a book. It can only be pointed at. It can only pass silently from one still mind to another, the way a flame passes from one candle to the next without the first candle losing anything at all." We will come in time to why they said that. And it is one of the most beautiful answers in the whole story. It has to do, gently, with how little the real man left behind and how that silence became, on purpose, the very heart of what they built, but not yet. For now, I only want you to feel the contrast, because it is the engine of everything, the golden, measuring, certain world, and the quiet, barefoot figure standing in front of it who would not or could not play the counting game at all. And maybe, as you lie there, as the day finally lets go of you, maybe there is something in that for tonight too. So much of what wears us out is the counting, the measuring of the day. Did I do enough? Was it enough? Am I enough? The golden tower voice in the mind that wants to add up our merits and tells us, always, that the sum is too small. The man we are following, in legend and in the little we truly know of him, points somewhere else entirely, toward a stillness that is not earned and not measured, toward a depth that does not need to be added up. You do not have to understand it tonight. You do not have to reach it. You only have to know that he is over there, in the quiet, on the far side of all the counting, having put it down, and that you are allowed right now, in this bed, in this dark, to put it down too. We have come a long way already, and we have barely begun. We have met the oldest record and the old foreign monk before the Golden Tower, claiming 150 years and chanting Nama into the wind. We have met the two oldest witnesses, Yang Xuanji from 547 and Daoxuan from 645, and we have let them disagree, Persian or Indian, by land or by sea, without forcing them to agree. We have followed his name as it softened across the world, Bodhidharma to Bodhidharma to Dharma to Daruma to Dalma, the awakening carried gently from mouth to mouth. And we have left one door standing open in the dark, the door we will walk through together when you are deeper into the quiet. If the oldest record shows no wall, then where and when and why did the wall arrive? Take another slow breath now. Let it go even more loosely than the last. There is nothing to hold. The story will keep itself for you. And when you are ready, with no effort, no reaching, we will go on and we will find the wall. And we will find out what it really was, and whether it was stone at all or something far stiller and stranger than stone. So let us go and find the wall. The word that started it all is Biguan. It appears in Chinese as two characters. Bai means wall. Guan means gazing or contemplating or looking at. Biguan. Wall gazing. And the first time it is attached to Bodhidharma. The very first time a written source links the man to anything resembling a wall is in Daoxuan's Shu Gao Seng Zhuan, the continued biographies of eminent monks compiled around the year 645. That is already nearly 100 years after the old monk stood before the Yongning pagoda and pressed his palms together. Take a moment with that. A century of silence between the man and the first mention of the wall. Daoxuan was a careful monk and a serious scholar. He gathered what he could find, and what he wrote about Bodhidharma's method, Biguan, was not a picture of a man sitting in a cave staring at grey stone for 9 consecutive years. It was a description of a quality of mind. He wrote that Bodhidharma taught his followers to make the mind like a wall, still, impenetrable, letting nothing in and nothing out. Not reactive, not grasping, not pushed around by thought or sensation or the desire to be somewhere else. A wall does not argue with the wind. A wall does not chase the light that moves across it. A wall simply remains. This is the older meaning, the quieter, stranger one. Think of it this way. If someone told you to become a wall, you would not go and press your nose against the masonry of your house and stare at it until dawn. You would understand they were talking about something interior, a quality of steadiness and imperviousness to disturbance. That is what scholars like John McRae and Bernard Faure, two of the most careful readers of early Chan history, believe Daoxuan meant. Wall gazing as a metaphor for a particular meditative posture of mind. Not the wall in front of you, the wall you become. And there is something in that reading that is far more interesting than the cinematic version. Because the cinematic version and the man in the cave, the 9 years, the shadow burned into stone, is a remarkable image. It is the kind of image that stays in the mind, that holds people in chairs and keeps them listening. But it is, in its own way, a distraction from the stranger thing Daoxuan was pointing at. The idea that a human mind could become so still, so solidly, steadily itself, that it was no longer at the mercy of its own contents, that thoughts could pass through it the way wind passes through a courtyard, touching nothing essential. That is the teaching. The cave is the picture frame around the teaching, added later to make it visible, to give it a location in the world. Still, the cave is there, it is real, you can visit it. Behind the Shaolin Monastery on Mount Song in Henan Province, there is a small cave traditionally known as Damo Dong, Damo's cave, Bodhidharma's cave. Pilgrims go there. The path up the mountain is worn by centuries of feet, and inside the monastery, or near it, there is something called the Shadow Stone, a piece of rock said to bear the faint impression of Bodhidharma's silhouette, burned into the surface by 9 years of proximity, 9 years of a body radiating such concentrated presence that the stone itself remembered. The Shadow Stone was moved into the monastery at some point, kept as a relic, venerated. Let us be honest about what these things are. They are sites of devotion. They are places where faith takes physical form, where the invisible teaching is given something to touch. People carry real things up that mountain, real grief, real weariness, real longing for some kind of ground under their feet. The cave gives that longing somewhere to land. The Shadow Stone gives it something to see. There is nothing false about the comfort. The question is only whether the stone itself holds evidence of a historical event, and there the honest answer is no. The stone is veneration. Veneration is its own kind of truth, but it is not the same kind of truth as the Luoyang Qilan Ji, written in the year 547. We hold them both. That is what this night is for. Not to strip away wonder, but to understand where it came from, and to find underneath the wonder something even more interesting. Because here is what is more interesting. The Jingde Chuandeng Lu, the record of the transmission of the lamp compiled by a monk named Dao Yuan in the year 1004, is where the concrete, literal 9-year scene fully arrives. 9 years, a wall, Shaolin. The shadow burned into the stone. By the time Dao Yuan set it down, this was the story. It was the story everyone knew. It was the story that defined a man, and through the man, defined an entire lineage of practice. But Dao Yuan was writing approximately 500 years after Bodhidharma is supposed to have lived. 500 years. Pause with that. 500 years is the distance between us and the early 1500s, between us and Machiavelli and the first printing press spreading across Europe, and the very beginning of what we call the modern world. That is how far the transmission of the lamp stands from its subject. And in those 5 centuries, something happened that is one of the most fascinating things about this entire story. A tradition grew, a school formed, disciples taught students, who taught students, who taught students, and each generation needed to know where it had come from, needed a route that went all the way down, needed an ancestor who had received the transmission first. And the man they chose, the man the tradition chose, was Bodhidharma, the dark-eyed, motionless monk from the West who said almost nothing and meant everything. And the image that gathered around him and solidified over those 500 years was the wall. The wall became the emblem of what Chan was trying to do. That is the key. The image was not arbitrary. A tradition that said, stop talking about enlightenment and actually sit down and be still. That tradition needed a founder who had done the most extreme, most total, most uncompromising version of exactly that, and nothing is more extreme, more total, more uncompromising than 9 years, facing a wall, alone, until your shadow burned itself into stone. The story grew because the story was needed, and it grew toward the truth of what the practice asked of people, even if it grew away from the facts of what one man actually did. There is a rest pause here if you would like to take it. Take a slow, deep breath. in through the nose, and let it go slowly through the mouth until there is nothing left to release. Notice your back against the bed. Notice how much the bed is doing for you right now, holding everything, asking nothing. The story will keep. The wall will still be there, still standing when you come back. And so will we. When you are ready, with no particular hurry, we will go on. Now, there is another layer of this to understand, and it requires us to know something about the place where the wall gazing was said to have happened. Because Shaolin is not just a setting in this story. It is itself a story. And that story is older than Bodhidharma's, and it does not belong to him. The Shaolin Monastery, Shaolinsi in Chinese, the monastery in the forest of young trees on the lesser peak of Mount Song, was founded around the years 495 or 496 of the Common Era. That is a reliable date. It is supported by records and by the institutional memory of the monastery itself. The emperor who ordered its founding was Emperor Xiaowen of the Northern Wei dynasty, a ruler who was doing something remarkable and, in the political context of his time, quite bold. He was moving his capital southward toward Luoyang, bringing the full weight of his court closer to the heart of traditional Chinese culture. And as part of that movement, as part of his genuine and elaborate devotion to Buddhism, he ordered the construction of a monastery on Mount Song to receive a distinguished guest. That guest was not Bodhidharma. That guest was a monk named Batuo. In Sanskrit, Bodhidharma, meaning auspicious awakening, a name of blessing and clarity. Batuo had come from India, or from somewhere in the western regions, and he was valued especially as a translator. He could take the Sanskrit texts of the Buddhist canon and render them into Chinese, and this was enormously important work in a country where Buddhism was spreading, but the scriptures were still largely inaccessible to those who could not read the original languages. Batuo was the founding monk of Shaolin. The monastery was built for him. Its earliest identity was as a translation center, a place of scholarship and careful textual work. Bodhidharma, by the most reasonable reconstruction, came later. How much later is unclear. But the Shaolin of Batuo was a functioning institution before Bodhidharma arrived, if he arrived there at all. His connection to the monastery was real in tradition and powerful in the imagination of every subsequent generation. But it was not foundational in the institutional sense. The monastery was not built for him. It was not named for him. It was given to him in a way by the centuries that followed, by a tradition that needed its most important ancestor to have a home. And then there is the question of Kung Fu. This is a beloved story and a genuinely false one, and it is worth spending time with both the story and the falseness, because understanding why it is false tells you something important about how legends work. Here is the story as most people know it. Bodhidharma arrived at Shaolin. He sat and he sat and he sat, 9 years facing the wall, and the monks around him, who were supposed to be practicing, supposed to be meditating, supposed to be cultivating the inner discipline that leads toward liberation, were instead soft and sedentary and falling asleep. Their bodies had grown weak from too much sitting and not enough movement. They could not sustain the practice, and so Bodhidharma, out of compassion or perhaps out of impatience, the legend allows for both, taught them a series of physical exercises, a set of movements designed to strengthen the body so that the mind could do its work. These exercises, the story goes, became the foundation of the Shaolin martial arts tradition. And the Shaolin martial arts, the story continues, became the root of all Chinese martial arts. And so Bodhidharma, the silent Indian monk who sat facing a wall, is also the grandfather of Kung Fu. It is a wonderful story. It is also, on the evidence, not true. The text at the center of the claim is called the Yijin Jing. Yijin Jing means, roughly, the Muscle Tendon Change Classic. It is a manual of physical exercises, or in some versions, a set of instructions for developing internal energy. And it carries a preface that attributes it to Bodhidharma himself. He wrote it, the preface says. He left it for the monk. The martial tradition grew from it. A scholar named Tang Hao examined the text carefully in the 20th century and found that the Yijin Jing, in its received form, dates to around the year 1624. That is not a typo. 1624. 1,100 years after Bodhidharma is supposed to have lived. The preface attributing it to him is a forgery, not a careless misattribution, not a well-meaning error, but a deliberate construction designed to give the text ancient authority by placing it in the hands of the most famous monk associated with Shaolin, the scholar Meir Shahar, who wrote the most thorough academic study of the Shaolin monastery and its martial traditions, a book called The Shaolin Monastery, careful and generous and deeply researched, confirmed and extended Tang Hao's findings. The martial arts tradition at Shaolin is real. Its history is long and interesting and worth knowing on its own terms. But its connection to Bodhidharma is a retroactive one, applied from a distance of many centuries, to give the tradition a founding figure worthy of its ambitions. Think about what this means. The Yijin Jing was authored, in a meaningful sense, somewhere around the early 17th century. Then a forger reached backward more than 1,000 years and put it in the hands of a 6th century Indian monk, who probably never wrote anything about bodies or fighting at all, because a tradition that wanted weight and depth and the kind of authority that comes from great age needed an ancestor. And Bodhidharma, already established as the first patriarch of Chan, already wrapped in the legend of 9 years at Shaolin, already the most dramatic and recognizable founding figure available, was the obvious choice. This is how legends grow, not from lies exactly, from need, from the very human requirement that important things have important origins, that the profound traditions we inherit came from someone worthy of what they became. The Yijin Jing is real. The Shaolin martial arts are real. The need that produced the story of Bodhidharma founding them is real. The only thing that is not real is the Bodhidharma who actually wrote the text and taught the exercises. And here is a thing worth sitting with quietly, in the dark. The actual Bodhidharma, or the figure closest to what the early sources show us, was not interested in bodies becoming stronger. He was interested in minds becoming still. The 4 practices, which we will come to, say almost nothing about physical strength. They say a great deal about endurance, equanimity, the capacity to receive suffering without being destroyed by it. It is a different kind of toughness, not the toughness of the body that can break a plank, the toughness of the mind that can hold difficulty without needing it to be otherwise. The monk who got attributed with the invention of Kung Fu was, on the best available evidence, a man whose deepest teaching was about the dissolution of the fighting self. Take a slow breath with that, and notice something else. The shadow stone, the cave, the Yijin Jing with its forged preface, the 9 years crystallizing 5 centuries later in Dao Yuan's transmission of the lamp. None of these are random. They all point in the same direction. They all reach toward the same thing. An image of practice so total, so committed, so far beyond ordinary endurance, that it cannot be argued with. 9 years. A shadow burned into stone. A body so disciplined it could teach others to move in ways they had never moved before. Every layer of legend is adding intensity to the same message. This is what it means to commit. This is what it looks like when someone actually does the thing they are asking others to do. Without compromise, without exit, without the quiet reservation, that says, I will try this for a while and see how it goes. The tradition needed a founder who modeled absolute commitment. And so, over the centuries, it gave him one. There is a kind of generosity in that, actually, not toward historical accuracy, but toward the thing being transmitted. The people who built these stories were not trying to deceive, they were trying to preserve. They were holding up an image and saying, this is what the practice looks like at its most uncompromising. This is the direction. No one can sit for 9 years. But knowing that someone did, or knowing that a tradition believed someone did, which does something very similar in the mind, pulls you a little further into the stillness you are reaching toward. You do not need to resolve this tonight. You do not need to decide whether the cave was literal or metaphorical, whether Bigwan was a wall of stone or a wall of mind, whether the shadow is burned into the rock or only into the imagination of those who needed it to be there. You can hold all of it gently, all of. The way you hold a story a grandparent told you, knowing it was probably simplified, possibly embellished, certainly shaped by what they needed it to mean, and finding that it is no less true for any of that. Some truths live in the shape of things, not in their measurements. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. And another. Let your arms go heavy. Let your legs go heavy. The monastery is there, on Mount Song in Henan, the forest of young trees around it. The cave is there, behind the walls, up the path. The shadow stone sits in the quiet of the monastery, holding whatever it holds. Somewhere in all of that, in the stone and the story and the 5 centuries of hands reaching toward the same image, there is a man, or the shape a man left behind. And we have been moving toward him slowly, the way you move toward something important, without rushing, without grabbing, letting the approach itself be part of the arriving. When you are ready, we will continue. The mountain is still there. Mount Song is one of the 5 sacred mountains of China. The central sacred mountain, the one around which the others are organized. There is something in that. The place where Bodhidharma was said to have sat is not an arbitrary hillside. It is the center, the point from which all 4 directions are measured. And the tradition placed its first patriarch at the center of the landscape, on the mountain that was already, before he arrived, understood as the axis of the world. Whether or not he sat there for 9 years, he sits there now, in the imagination of every person who has ever practiced Chan or Zen, every person who has ever tried to make the mind like a wall, every person who has ever sat down with their face toward a blank surface and tried to understand what it would mean to simply remain. He is there, in the tradition, at the center of something that spread, as we will see, all the way to Japan and Korea and Vietnam, and eventually to every corner of the world where someone sits down quietly and tries not to flinch. Bigwan, wall gazing, the mind like a wall. There is a quality of practice described in those 2 characters that is worth staying with a little longer before we move on, because the deeper you look at it, the stranger and more interesting it becomes. When Daoxuan described the method in 645, he was writing about a specific kind of meditation. Not all meditation looks the same. Some traditions ask you to focus on a single point, a breath, a flame, a mantra, and to draw the mind back to that point every time it wanders. Some ask you to watch the mind's movements without engaging them, to sit as a witness to your own thoughts, observing but not participating. Some ask you to hold a question, a quan, a paradox that has no logical answer, and to press against it until something in the mind gives way. Bigwan, as Daoxuan describes it, seems to belong to that still, witnessing, non-reactive family. You sit. You do not grasp at the thoughts that come. You do not push them away. You do not follow them down the hallways they open. You simply remain, like a wall, letting what passes pass, staying when the wind has gone. In Sanskrit, the word for meditation, the word that eventually became Chan and then Zen, through one of the great etymological journeys in human history, is dhyana. Dhyana. And dhyana carries within it the sense of absorption, of gathering, of the mind so fully present to what is that there is no leftover self standing outside the experience and commenting on it. In China, dhyana became chana and then just chan. In Japan, chan became Zen. One word, traveling from the banks of the Ganges to the streets of Kyoto, picking up new clothes and new contexts at each stop, but carrying something consistent through all of it. The same pointing, the same invitation, sit down, become still, find out what is left when the restlessness ends. Bodhidharma's wall-gazing is an image of that deepest stillness, a stillness so complete that the world can move around it without disturbing it. A stillness that is not the absence of life, but a quality inside life, the same quality that was in the Dhammapada's still lake, undisturbed by rain, reflecting clearly. The wall does not mean coldness, it does not mean indifference. A wall that has stood for a long time has, in a way, been through everything. Wind and rain and ice and heat and the hands of those who built it and the hands of those who leaned against it in sorrow. The wall has received all of that, and it remains. That is what was being asked of the meditator. Not to become numb, to become solid, to have a center that holds when the storms of thought and feeling and circumstance move through. There is something in that for tonight. For this particular kind of dark, the quiet of late hours, the mind that sometimes will not quiet down, that returns to what troubles it, that rehearses conversations and replays concerns and builds small, elaborate structures of worry about tomorrow. That mind is not broken. That mind is doing what minds do. The teaching of Big One is not that the thoughts should stop. It is that you do not have to be swept away by them. That somewhere in you, beneath the movement, there is something as still as a wall. And you can rest in that something even when the surface is busy. Even now. You can feel it a little. The weight of your body on the bed. The steadiness of your breath. The fact that underneath whatever is moving in your mind, your body is just here, present. Not troubled by the trouble, breathing without being asked to, holding you without effort. That is its own kind of Big One, that is its own kind of wall. Let another breath move through you, and another. There is no hurry. The story is patient. Now. Before we leave the wall and step into the famous room where an emperor asked a monk how much merit he had earned, let us notice one more thing about the Shaolinzi and its place in this story. Because the monastery that tradition gave to Bodhidharma is, in itself, a remarkable institution. Whatever its actual historical relationship to the man, it became something. Not because of what he did there, but because of what people believed he did there and what that belief called out in them. A place where someone is said to have sat in total stillness for 9 years becomes, for those who visit it, a place where total stillness seems possible. Not required, not demanded, possible. The way a room where someone great once worked feels different from an ordinary room, not because the walls are made of different material, but because something happened there that the walls still seem to hold. Whether or not the historical Bodhidharma sat in that cave on Mount Song, the cave on Mount Song became a place where people went to sit, and sitting in that place in the presence of that accumulated intention, all the pilgrims, all the monks, all the centuries of people who came to that hillside carrying the same question, did something real in them. The legend produced real transformation. That is worth honoring, even as we are honest about what the legend is. This is, in its own way, the deepest argument for why the stories grew the way they did. A tradition is not just a set of ideas, it is a practice, and a practice needs to be done, and doing it is hard. The image of Bodhidharma at the wall, motionless, uncompromising, sitting through everything, gave practitioners a direction to aim at, not to match. No one was expected to sit for 9 years, but to aim at, to carry in the back of the mind when their own sitting got difficult, when the knees ached and the mind wandered, and the question of why they were doing this at all rose up with unusual force. The story said, someone did this, someone actually did this. Keep going, that is not deception, that is teaching. The best teaching often works through images that aim beyond what is literally achievable, because it is the aiming that changes you, not the arriving. The cave is on the mountain, the shadow is in the stone. The wall stands in the tradition, as still as it ever was, waiting for whoever is ready to sit down in front of it and learn what the mind looks like when it finally stops arguing with itself. And that is where we have arrived at the end of this particular stretch of the night, not at the end of the story, nowhere near the end, but at a kind of threshold, the way you sometimes arrive after walking for a long time at a door you did not know you were walking toward. The wall has been found, its real nature has been examined, the metaphor, the literature, the scholarship, the cave that is real, and the shadow stone that holds more veneration than evidence. The monastery has been given its proper history, built for Batuo, attended by Bodhidharma later in the tradition's telling. The Yi Jin Jing has been set down in its true century, the 1600s, and the forged preface has been recognized for what it was, a reaching back across 1,000 years for an ancestor worthy of the tradition being built. We have done all of that together, without hurrying, without dismissing the wonder, just looking carefully at what is there and being honest about what we see. And now, on the other side of the wall, someone is sitting in a room. And across from him, not across a wall, but across a chamber of considerable political and religious power, is an emperor who has built temples, who has sponsored monks, who has had sutras copied in his own name and monasteries raised on mountain slopes at his own expense, an emperor who has done, by any reasonable account, an enormous amount of pious, devoted Buddhist work. And he has a question, the kind of question that a person asks when they have spent a great deal of their life accumulating something, and they want to know finally whether any of it counts. The question is simple. The answer is the kind of answer that changes the shape of the room. He says, "How much merit have I earned?" And the monk says, "None at all." Let us stay with that for a moment. Let us not rush past it the way we sometimes rush past the things that most deserve a pause. An emperor. One of the great Buddhist patrons of the 6th century, a man named Liang Wudi, Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty, who had poured a considerable portion of an empire's wealth and attention into the project of making himself a good Buddhist. Temples raised, monks ordained and fed, sutras copied out by hand, which in that era was not a quick thing. It was a devotional labor, scribes bending over paper for months, reproducing the sacred texts character by character, so that merit would accrue, so that the account would grow, so that the Dharma would be served and the service would be recognized. He had done all of this. And he had come to this monk, this foreign monk, lean and difficult and reputedly indifferent to comfort. And he had asked the question that such a man, having done such things, would eventually need to ask. How much? What is it worth? How much merit have I accumulated? Wugongde, no merit at all. Take a slow breath. Feel the floor beneath you, the weight of your body against whatever surface holds you. You don't need to understand this fully tonight. Just let it rest near you. The Emperor hears this, and he does not accept it easily. He presses. He is an emperor. Pressing is among the things he does well. So he asks another question, the deeper one, the one that perhaps he has always meant to ask, and has only now, in this unusual company, found the nerve for. He asks, what is the highest meaning of the holy truths? What, at the very summit of all this teaching, is actually true? Quoran Wu Sheng. Vast emptiness. Nothing holy. The room must have changed when those words arrived in it. Not because they are harsh. They are not delivered with harshness, at least not in the way the scene has been handed down. They are delivered with a kind of absolute calm, the way you might note that it is raining or that a particular stone is a particular color. Vast emptiness, nothing holy, no sacred object to acquire, no merit to accumulate, no ledger in which your temples and your ordinations and your copied sutras are being tallied against a final accounting. Vast emptiness. As if the sky itself had been asked what it contains and had answered, honestly, nothing, everything, these are the same. The Emperor presses one more time, because there is one more question, and it is perhaps the most human of the three. Having been told that his accumulation earns him nothing, and that the highest truth contains nothing holy, he looks at the man who has said these things and asks the only question that remains. Who, then, stands before me? Bu Shi, I don't know. Now here is the first thing we need to say about this scene, and we need to say it clearly and without apology, because it is simply true, and ignoring it would be a kind of dishonesty. This exchange, every word of it, every weighted syllable, has no contemporary evidence. There is no document from the Liang dynasty, no court record, no monk's diary from the time that places these two men in the same room and records what was said. The dialogue between Emperor Wu of Liang and the monk Bodhidharma, as it has come down to us in its famous form, is a literary construction. It was written and refined and given its final polished form centuries after both men are supposed to have lived. Its most famous home is Case 1 of the Bian Lu, the Blue Cliff Record, which was compiled around 1125 CE. That is more than 500 years after Bodhidharma's traditional lifetime, 500 years in which this story was told, shaped, retold, given sharper edges and a cleaner architecture until it arrived at us in the form of one of the most celebrated exchanges in the whole history of Chan and Zen. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice the quiet around you, the way the dark holds the room. When you are ready, we will continue together. So does that mean the story does not matter? Does that mean we should put it aside and say, well, it didn't happen, so it is nothing? Not at all. In fact, the opposite. The story matters enormously. Not as biography, not as a record of something that occurred on a particular morning in a particular audience chamber, but as a teaching that a whole civilization decided was important enough to preserve and refine and pass forward. The people who told this story and retold it were not trying to deceive. They were doing what teaching traditions do. They were finding the clearest possible vessel for an idea that they believed was true, and they were pouring that idea into the vessel of a dramatic scene, because drama is how human beings remember things, because a dialogue lands where an abstract principle only grazes. And the idea being poured into this vessel is one of the most radical ideas the Buddha's teaching ever produced. It is this: that merit, as most people understand it, as something you accumulate, as a spiritual account you build through good works and devotion and piety, as something the universe owes you in proportion to your effort, is not quite what the deepest teaching is pointing at. Or rather, the good works matter, the temples matter, the care and the ordination of monks and the copying of sutras, these are not nothing. But if you do them in order to accumulate, in order to have something, in order to build a self that is identifiable as meritorious, then somewhere in the doing of them, you have missed the point. The grasping is the problem. The keeping of a score is the problem. And the monk in the story says this with 3 words: none, empty, don't know. These are not 3 separate answers. They are, in the Chan telling, 3 facets of the same answer. The no merit does not mean the temples were worthless. It means, are you doing this because you are trying to own something? Because you are trying to be someone? Because there is a self in here that is working hard to secure its own goodness? If so, then all the accumulation is still, finally, in the service of a story you are telling about yourself. And the highest truth, Quoran Wu Sheng, does not contain that story. The highest truth is not a sacred object you can possess. It is not a status you can achieve. It is not even holy in the sense of being a special category of thing set apart from ordinary things. It simply is what is, vastly, without attachment to its own vastness. And then, I don't know. Not as a retreat, not as evasion, not as false modesty, but as the most honest possible answer to the question of who this person is. Because the person who has genuinely seen into vast emptiness, who has, in the language of Chan, seen through the story of self, cannot answer, "Who are you?" with a name and a title and a homeland, not because those things are false, but because they are not the whole of what is standing there. The whole of what is standing there is something that does not fit in a name. And the most truthful thing the monk can say is, I don't know. I cannot tell you what I am. I can only be it. This is Chan's heartbeat. This is what all the wall-gazing, whether literal or metaphorical, was pointing toward. The mind that has become like a wall is a mind that lets nothing stick to it. Not the label of emperor, not the label of merit earner, not even the label of monk or master or teacher. It is a mind so clear and so still that it cannot be captured in a name, and it knows this about itself, and it says so. Let us rest here for just a breath. Take a slow breath in and let it go. The room is still. You are still. Good. Let us continue. We said this dialogue is found in its most famous form in the Blue Cliff record, the Bian Lu, compiled around 1125 CE. But to leave it there would be to leave something important out. The scene became what is called a koan, case 1 of the Blue Cliff record, the most celebrated koan collection in Chan and Zen. And a koan is not a riddle in the sense of having a clever answer that you look up when you give up. A koan is something closer to a knot you are given to work on, a question or exchange that resists the mind's ordinary tools, that cannot be solved by thinking harder, that must be stayed with the way you stay with a piece of music that you do not entirely understand but that moves something in you anyway. I don't know is not a koan because it is mysterious. It is a koan because it is radically, uncomfortably, liberatingly honest, and the honesty is itself the teaching. Generations of monks and practitioners have sat with this exchange. Rinzai teachers in Japan, in the tradition that eventually came from the lineage that includes this meeting in its mythology, have pressed students on it. What do you say when asked who you are? Not your name, not your history, not your role. Who are you? And the instruction is not to think your way to an answer, but to find a place in you that knows the way the body knows how to breathe without deciding to. But we are getting a little ahead of ourselves, because before we arrive at Japan, before we arrive at the Blue Cliff record and its compilation in the Song dynasty, we need to spend some time with what is actually the most important thing we have from the man at the center of all this. Not the most famous thing, the most genuine thing, the thing that the scholars look at and say, this, or something close to this, may actually reflect what he taught. It is a short text, modest in length, almost ascetically so, for something that anchors such an enormous tradition. It is called the Eru Sixing Lun, which you can translate as the Treatise on the Two Entrances and the Four Practices. It was preserved partly through the Dunhuang manuscripts, those extraordinary scrolls that were sealed in a cave in the oasis town of Dunhuang in the Gansu province around the year 1000 CE and rediscovered in 1900 when a Taoist monk found a hidden room. Thousands of texts, sealed away for 9 centuries, emerged from that room, and among them were copies of this teaching attributed to Bodhidharma and the circle around him. Not all of it is certainly his hand. The text has a preface by a disciple. But the scholars who have studied it consider it the least legendary, most plausibly authentic body of teaching connected to the man. John McCrae, who spent a career on early Chan, treats it as the closest we can honestly get. Take a slow breath, feel the weight of what you've just heard, that we can actually get close. Through all the legend, through all the centuries of embellishment, there is this. A thin, quiet text. 2 entrances and 4 practices. Let us explore what is inside it. The 2 entrances are 2 ways of approaching the same place. The place, in the language of the teaching, is your own true nature, the original clarity of mind, the thing that is there before the thoughts, the thing the wall-gazing is supposed to reveal. And Bodhidharma, or the teaching attributed to him, says there are 2 ways in. The first entrance is the entrance by principle, Li Ru. It is sudden and direct. It is the entrance by seeing through, the entrance by recognizing. And the recognition is not built up over time like a house being constructed brick by brick, but arrives all at once like a light turning on. The way described in the text is, you quiet the mind, you let it become still and clear like a wall. There is big one again, the wall contemplation. And in that stillness you see that your true nature is the same as the nature of all beings. That the original clarity is not something you have earned or developed, but something that has always been there, waiting quietly behind the noise of grasping and fearing and wanting and judging. You do not acquire it. You recognize it. The recognition is the entrance. This is the sudden illumination that runs through Chan and Zen. The idea that there is no gradual ladder you must climb because you are already, in some fundamental sense, where you need to be. The path is the seeing of this, not the arriving. Now, the entrance by principle sounds extraordinary, and it is, but it is also easy to misunderstand, easy to turn into a kind of spiritual pride, as if one bright moment of recognition means the work is done, the person is fixed, the suffering is over. And this is where the second entrance matters enormously. The second entrance is the entrance by practice, Xingru, and the practice is not separate from the principle. It is not a lower road for people who couldn't manage the sudden illumination. It is the living of what was seen, the embodying of it, the working of it out through every situation that life actually presents. And the entrance by practice is divided into 4 parts, 4 practices, sixing, each one a way of holding yourself in the world that follows from having glimpsed, however briefly and imperfectly, your own true nature. Let us spend time with each of them. Not rushing, they deserve the space. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice what has settled in you, what has begun to be still, and when you are ready, we will continue. The first practice is called Bao Yuan Xing, which you can translate as requiting hatred or accepting suffering, or, more fully, the practice of requiting enmity. And here is what it teaches. When hardship comes to you, and it will come, it always does, it does not ask permission. The ordinary response is to ask why. Why me? Why now? Why this particular difficulty? What have I done to deserve this? And the teaching says the question itself is part of the trap, because it assumes a self that is being singled out for unfair treatment. It assumes that suffering is exceptional, that your difficulties are imposed on you from outside by a universe that owes you otherwise. Bao Yuan Xing says something different. It says, when difficulty arrives, instead of demanding an explanation from the universe, recognize that this hardship is the ripening of conditions set in motion long before this moment, before this life, in the traditional understanding across the whole vast stream of causes and effects that constitute the world you are living in. You are not being singled out. You are not being punished by a force that dislikes you. You are meeting the consequence of actions, intentions, energies that have accumulated and are now arriving in the form of this difficulty. And when you see it this way, something changes, not the difficulty. The difficulty remains exactly what it is, but your relationship to it changes. You are not a victim, you are meeting something, and you can meet it with patience, with steadiness, without the additional suffering of the story you are about to build around why this is unfair. There is a parable that might help this land. There was a woman in a small mountain village. Let us call her a weaver, because she spent her days at the loom. And she had an argument with her neighbor that had gone on for years. The kind of argument that is no longer really about the original thing, the water rights or the fence post or whatever it was, but has become its own country with its own laws and its own weather. The neighbor was difficult. The neighbor did things that were, by any fair accounting, genuinely unkind. And the weaver spent a portion of every day tending the grievance, adding to it, keeping it alive the way you keep a fire alive. One autumn her loom broke. The mechanism that kept the threads in tension cracked, and the cloth she had been working on for weeks fell loose and tangled, and she had to start again. She sat with the ruined cloth, and she thought, this is her fault. The neighbor. It is her negativity, her ill-wishing, her difficult energy that has brought this into my house. And then very slowly, she looked at the loom, and she saw that the piece that had cracked was old. It had been old when she inherited the loom from her mother. It had been bending and thinning for years, and it had finally reached the moment when it could not hold. Nothing her neighbor had done or thought or wished had touched this piece of wood. The wood had its own history, its own gradual exhaustion. The cracking was simply the arrival of something that had been coming for a long time. She sat with the ruined cloth a little longer, and something loosened in her. Not the grief about the cloth. That was still real. But the demand that someone be responsible, that someone be made to account for her difficulty. The difficulty was real. The someone to blame was a story she had been adding, and she could, if she chose, set the story down. This is Bao Yuan Xing, not resignation, not the suppression of grief or anger, but the practice of meeting difficulty without the additional weight of the story that someone, the universe, the neighbor, the unlucky circumstance, owes you different. The difficulty is real. The owing is a story. Set the story down. Meet what is. Take a slow breath. The teaching is not asking you to be extraordinary. It is not demanding that you never feel the weight of what is hard. It is asking something simpler and more possible, that tonight, with whatever difficulty is sitting near you, you try setting down just the question of why it is unfair, just for now, just for tonight. The morning can have its questions back, but tonight, set that one down. The second practice is Sui Yuan Xing, which translates as adapting to conditions or following conditions. And it speaks to the other side of the difficulty, to the good fortune, the moments of ease, the things that go well. Ordinary life oscillates between hardship and ease, between loss and gain, between the days when things fall into place and the days when they fall apart. And the ordinary mind, the mind that is not yet like a wall, porous, reactive, grabbing at the pleasant and pushing at the unpleasant, oscillates with it. When things are good, there is a grasping, a wanting to hold, a fear underneath the pleasure that it will not last. When things are bad, there is the resistance, the demand that it be otherwise, the suffering on top of the suffering. Sui Yuan Xing is the practice of meeting both conditions, ease and difficulty, gain and loss, with the same steadiness, not with indifference, not with the flatness of someone who has decided nothing matters, but with a kind of equanimity that recognizes that both the ease and the difficulty are part of the same stream of conditions, the same flowing of causes into effects, and that grasping at the ease and resisting the difficulty only adds to the turbulence. The monk who has seen into vast emptiness does not stop feeling things, but the feeling does not sweep the whole house away. The mind remains underneath, clear and still, like a wall that rain runs down but does not enter. There is an old image from a different tradition, not this one, but it rhymes with this one, of a man on a boat in the middle of a lake on a stormy night. The storm is real, the waves are real, but the lake is also real. All the way down and under the waves, below the turbulence, the water is still. The practice of Sui Yuan Xing is not to pretend the storm is not there. It is to know that you are also the lake, not only the surface, and there is something gentle buried in this practice, something that matters particularly at night, when the mind is reviewing what happened today, or last week, or 10 years ago, cataloguing the things that went well and the things that didn't, comparing the actual to the imagined. Sui Yuan Xing says, meet all of it with the same open hands. Gain arrived because conditions allowed it. Loss arrived because conditions allowed that. You were not the engineer of either one in the way you like to think you were. You played your part in a vast web of causes and effects, and this particular moment, this particular gain, or this particular loss is the web arriving in this shape. Hold it with open hands. Let it be what it is. Let us pause here, take a slow, deep breath. Notice your hands. Really notice them if you can. The way they rest, the way they are already in this moment, open. You don't need to hold anything tonight, just breathe. The third practice is Wu Suo Qiu Xing, seeking nothing, or the practice of desirelessness. And this one, in the wrong hands, in the wrong reading, sounds like despair. If I seek nothing, if I want nothing, then what is there? What is the point? What gets me out of bed? But that is not what the teaching is pointing at. It is not an instruction to become an empty vessel with no preferences, no loves, no directions. It is pointing at something more specific and more possible. The seeking that this practice addresses is the seeking that is driven by the belief that you are incomplete. The seeking that says, I will be okay when I have this. I will be at peace when that is resolved. I will be enough when I have achieved a certain thing or become a certain person or have secured a certain love or recognition or safety. That seeking, when driven by the premise that there is a gap in you that must be filled before you can rest, is what Wu Suo Qiu Xing is addressing. Because the Chan teaching says the gap is not real, the incompleteness is not real. It is a story the grasping mind tells itself to justify its own motion, to stay busy, to keep from sitting still and discovering that the stillness is not emptiness, but fullness. The fullness of what is simply here, simply present, simply this. There was a monk Let us say he was a young man who had come to a monastery with great ambitions for his own awakening. He wanted it badly. He sat long hours in meditation. He studied hard. He pressed his teacher with questions. He was, by any measure, sincere. And his teacher watched him for a season, and then said to him one afternoon, "What are you looking for?" The monk said, "I am looking for my true nature, for liberation, for the freedom from suffering." The teacher nodded. He pointed to the window where light was coming in across the stone floor. He said, "Is the light looking for the room, or is it simply here?" The monk turned this over for a long time, because the light does not arrive with an agenda. It is not incomplete without the room. It enters because entering is what light does, not because the light needs something from the room. And what the teacher was pointing at, what Wu Suo Qiu Xing is pointing at, is that your true nature, the awareness that you are, is not seeking anything either. It is here, simply here, in the same way the light is here. The seeking is the overlay, the story, the adding of a project to what is already complete. This does not mean you stop working, stop caring, stop moving through the world with intention and love and effort. It means you work, care, move, without the hidden premise that you are incomplete without the result. You let yourself be moved by what genuinely matters without being driven by the fear that you are not yet enough. The difference is subtle, but it changes the quality of every moment. And at night, lying in the dark when the old searching starts, the reviewing of what you have and have not yet achieved, the measuring of your life against some imagined version of what it should be, Wu Suo Qiu Xing offers a gentle interruption. Nothing is required of you in this moment. Nothing is missing that needs to be found tonight. The awareness that you are is already here. It has been here the whole time. You can rest. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the body be heavy. Let the mind be, just for this breath, not on its way anywhere. Good. The fourth practice is Cheng Fa Xing, acting in accord with the Dharma, or conforming to the Dharma. And this one is the one that holds the other three together. It is, at its simplest, the practice of acting from what you have seen rather than from what you habitually assume, acting without the grasping, acting without the accumulation, acting not to secure a merit, not to build a self, not to fill a gap you believe to be there, but because the Dharma, the nature of things as they actually are, calls for this response to this moment, and you respond. In the text, it is connected to the recognition that your nature and the nature of all beings is not separate, that the wall of self is, at the deepest level, a construction rather than a fact. And if the wall of self is a construction, then the suffering of others is not quite as alien as it usually feels. The compassion that follows from this recognition is not performed. It is not added on top of ordinary self-interest as a virtue. It arises naturally the way warmth arises from a fire. Not because the fire has decided to be warm, but because warmth is what the fire is. Cheng Fa Xing is the practice of living from this, of meeting each situation with the response that the situation calls for, without the interference of the project of building a self that is recognizable as good or wise or spiritual. It is, in a way, the undoing of exactly what the emperor was doing, the accumulation of merit as a thing he could hold and point to and say, "This is mine, this is what I have made, this is what I am." Cheng Fa Xing lets go of the accumulation, and in letting it go finds that there is something left, not nothing, a responsiveness, a capacity to be moved by what is actually there, and to act from that movement, cleanly and without calculation. These four practices, Bao Yuan Xing, Sui Yuan Xing, Wu Suo Qiu Xing, Cheng Fa Xing, are not a system in the sense of a ladder to be climbed or a checklist to be completed. They are four angles on the same understanding, four ways of holding yourself that all point back to the same central seeing. They are also, in their quietness, in their almost severe simplicity, very different from the towering, legendary figure that carries them. The monk who sits for 9 years, the monk whose eyelids fall, the monk who walks out of his own coffin. These four practices are the work of a teacher who is trying to give someone a useful way to live, not a way to be astonishing. And perhaps that is the most convincing argument for their authenticity. They do not feel like legend, they feel like instruction. Let us explore a story about Cheng Fa Xing and what it means to act without calculation. There was a physician, let us place him in a town near a large river, who was known for his skill and also eventually for a particular quality that the other physicians in the region did not share. When a person came to him who could not pay, he treated them anyway. Not as an act of charity that he kept a record of, not as a thing he expected to be repaid in a later life or a better reputation. He simply treated them because the illness was there and the skill was there, and those two things meeting each other in this room at this moment produced an obvious response. He did not pause to calculate whether the response would benefit him. The situation and the capacity met, and from that meeting came the action. A colleague of his, frustrated by this, once asked him, "Don't you worry about how much you are giving away? Don't you worry that you are impoverishing yourself by helping people who cannot pay?" The physician thought about this for a while, and then he said, "I have noticed that when I am treating someone, I am not giving anything away. I am not diminishing. I am just doing the thing that is happening. The treating is happening. The way breathing is happening. I am not poorer for breathing. I am not poorer for this." The colleague found this impossible and went away puzzled. But the physician continued for many years doing the thing that was happening, and the town continued to have a physician who showed up without calculation. And this, in its modest and quiet way, was Cheng Fa Xing. Not a display, not a performance, not merit being accumulated, just the situation and the capacity meeting and the natural response arising. Let us pause and breathe. Take a slow, slow breath. Feel where you are, the room around you, the quiet in it. You don't need to understand all of this perfectly tonight. Just let it rest near you. Now we need to meet two more people, Huike and Dao Yu, the two disciples named in Dao Xuan's 7th century biography, the Shu Gao Seng Zhuan, as the ones who received the teaching from Bodhidharma. Dao Yu appears briefly, holding the teaching in his body. The tradition has less to say about him, and what it has is brief. But Huike, the man who would become the second patriarch of Chan, the one to whom the flame passed, Huike has a story, and the story has at its center an exchange that is, arguably, the most doctrinally important thing associated with Bodhidharma's teaching. The setting, in the traditional telling, is a cave in winter. Snow has been falling. The young man, Huike, though we may not know his name yet at this moment in the telling, has come to find the teacher and has been refused or ignored or simply not answered, and so he waits. He stands in the snow outside the cave where Bodhidharma is meditating, and he waits through the night. The snow rises. By some accounts it rises to his waist, and still he stands, not moving, not demanding, not performing his sincerity for an audience, just standing the way a question stands, the way a life stands that has decided it will not go home without what it came for. We need to be clear about what happens next, because the tradition has two layers here, and they deserve to be named separately. What the tradition says happened next is that the young man, desperate to prove his sincerity, took a blade and cut off his own left arm and held it out to the teacher. An offering, a proof. Here, this is how much I mean what I am asking. The tradition is entirely clear on this. The arm severing is the moment that moves the story, and what Bodhidharma does when he turns and sees the man standing in red snow with one arm is he accepts him. The severity of the gesture proves the severity of the seeking. The teaching is given. Now, the arm severing is almost certainly a legendary embellishment. The scholars say so, and the scholars are very probably right. It follows a pattern well established in religious literature, the literature of extreme devotion and extreme sacrifice as a proof of sincerity. The same pattern appears in other traditions. It is what a tradition does when it wants to say, this person wanted the teaching more than anything. More than comfort, more than safety, more than the ordinary life. The arm is a way of saying that in a story. It is a vivid and unforgettable way of saying it. But it is not most likely to what happened in a literal cave on a literal winter night. What is not legendary, what has doctrinal weight, what the Chan tradition has turned over and returned to and studied and practiced with for 14 centuries, is what happened when Bodhidharma finally turned to this man. The exchange, the dialogue, which is brief, almost unbearably brief for what it carries. The young man says, "My mind is not at peace. Please, teacher, pacify my mind." Bodhidharma says, "Bring me your mind and I will pacify it." And the young man sits with this. He turns inward. He looks for the thing being asked for. He looks the way you look for something in a room, systematically, methodically, checking each corner, each surface, each possible location, and he cannot find it. He cannot find the mind as an object. He cannot produce it. He cannot say, "Here, this is it. This is the thing. Take it and fix it." And so he says, "I have searched for the mind everywhere, and I cannot find it." And Bodhidharma says, "There, I have pacified it." Let us stay with that for a moment. Just stay with it. Don't try to solve it tonight. Don't try to understand it the way you would understand a problem in arithmetic. Just let it be there, the way a door is there, whether or not you walk through it. The teaching is this: the mind that is not at peace, like the mind that is anxious, restless, troubled, turning over the same things in the dark. That mind, when you try to locate it, when you try to find it as a solid thing, a fixed thing, a thing with edges that can be identified and held up and examined, is not there in the way you expected. You search and you find thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, worries, plans. You find the contents of mind. But the mind itself, the thing that would be at peace or at war, the thing that would be fixable, it cannot be found as a solid object. And in the not finding, something happens. The grasping has been looking for something to grasp, and it reaches in and finds air. And in finding air, it relaxes just slightly, just enough. And in that relaxation, the agitation, which was always partly the agitation of looking for solid ground, subsides. Not because the mind was found and fixed, but because it was not found, because its not findability is itself a form of freedom. This is Chan's doctrinal heartbeat. This is what all the silence and the wall and the stillness were in service of. Not the accumulation of understanding, not the building of a better self, not the earning of merit, but the discovery that the self that was supposed to be built, the mind that was supposed to be at peace, is not the solid, separate thing it announced itself to be. And that in this not finding, there is more space than you thought, more room to breathe, more ground to stand on, not less. Huike became the second patriarch of Chan. He passed the teaching to the third to the fourth, and so the line moved forward through the centuries, carrying in its center this exchange, this impossibly brief and impossibly deep conversation in the snow. Take a slow, slow breath. Feel the weight of your body, the solidity of where you rest. The mind that is searching tonight for what is wrong, for what needs to be solved, for what must be fixed before you can rest. See if you can, just for this moment, let it search, let it look. And notice what it is looking for may not be quite where it expected. And in that noticing, something perhaps begins to settle. Dao Yu, the other disciple named in the 7th century record, is less present in the surviving story. He received the teaching, held it, passed it forward. The tradition holds this much, but he does not have a famous exchange attached to his name, does not have a dramatic scene that the compilers of later lamp texts could use to fix him in the reader's imagination. He is part of the fabric rather than a bright thread in it. And there is something quietly human about this, that even in a tradition of extraordinary figures, most of the people who carry something forward do so without drama, without famous words, without a scene that gets turned into a koan. They simply carry it. The way most of the water in a river does not produce a visible wave, but is still the river, still moving, still arriving. And so we have now been inside the 3 central scenes that Part 3 promised to explore. The audience chamber, where the emperor asks about his merit and receives 3 answers that reorder his understanding, or should, if he is ready to hear them. The cave where a man stands in snow with arms outstretched and finds, in the looking for his mind, the beginning of something that can't quite be named. And the quiet text, the Eru Sixing Lun, preserved through the Dunhuang manuscripts with its 2 entrances and its 4 practices, Bao Yuan Xing, Sui Yuan Xing, Wu Suo Qiu Xing, Cheng Fa Xing, which are the most honest, most grounded, most plausibly real body of teaching we have from this figure. The emperor wanted to know if his merit had been noticed. The monk said, "There is nothing to notice in the sense you mean." The disciple wanted his mind fixed. The monk said, "Bring it to me," and the disciple found he could not. And in not finding it, something shifted. The text wanted to tell people how to live in a world that will reliably be difficult, and so it said, "Requite hatred with patience. Follow conditions with equanimity. Seek nothing with the premise that you are incomplete. Act from what you have seen rather than what you hope to secure." These 3 scenes do not belong to the same literary moment. The audience chamber dialogue was written in its final form centuries after the man died. The mind-pacifying exchange was shaped and refined by the lamp transmission tradition, the lineage texts that crystallized between the 900s and the 1100s. The Eru Sixing Lun comes from somewhere closer to the actual man, preserved in the Dunhuang manuscripts through a kind of accident of history. They belong to different documentary strata, and yet they speak to each other. They are consistent in a way that transcends the question of which parts are historically verified and which are literary construction. They all say the same thing from different angles. Don't grasp, don't accumulate, don't build a self from merit or achievement or status and then defend it. Look carefully at what you actually are and find that it is not quite what you assumed. And in that finding, or in that not finding, discover something that is strangely more restful than the self you were defending. The wall, whatever else it was in service of this. The stillness was in service of this. The 9 years, whether literal, whether legendary, whether a meditation technique reframed as a heroic feat, pointed here, toward the mind that stops adding, the mind that lets things be as they are. The mind, in the language of the teaching, that has become like a wall, not because it is cold or hard or unfeeling, but because it no longer lets the storm inside. It is still. And in its stillness, everything that passes through it is met clearly and released cleanly. We have not yet arrived at the legends that complete the outer frame of this story. The eyelids that are said to have fallen, the tomb that is said to have been empty, the sandal that is said to have been the only thing remaining, the The red doll with the painted eyes, sold at market fairs and kept on shelves in homes across Japan, that carries this man's image in the form of a wish. And the long chain, 700 years and 2 sea crossings. From the cave on Mount Song to the Zen gardens of Kyoto, from Bodhidharma to Eisai to Dogen, from Chan to Zen, from the Sanskrit dhyana to the word that crossed the ocean and entered a different language and became something both the same and entirely new. All of that is still ahead, but for now, let us stay here just a little longer. Let us stay in the room where an emperor was told, none. And in the cave where a disciple was told, bring me your mind. And in the quiet of the text from Dunhuang, where a teacher said, here are 4 ways to hold yourself in a difficult world. These are the things that lasted, not the eyelids, not the kung fu, not the 9 years as a marvel, the practices, the exchanges, the recognition that the mind you have been trying to fix may not in the end need to be fixed in the way you thought, but simply seen with honesty and with patience until the seeing itself becomes the resting. Take a slow, deep breath. The room is still. You are still. Let it all settle gently, the way snow settles after it falls, quietly covering everything in the same soft white. There is one more story that circulates about this man, and it is told with great tenderness across many centuries, and it is almost certainly not true. But let us meet it the way we have tried to meet everything in this telling, with honesty about what it is, and without any desire to strip it of the warmth it carries. The story goes like this. Bodhidharma was sitting in the cave. He had been sitting for a long time. This is the cave on Mount Song behind Shaolinsi, the cave that pilgrims still visit today, the one where a stone is said to bear his shadow, pressed into the rock by 9 years of stillness and intention. And in this sitting, over these long hours and long seasons, he began to fall asleep. The body does what bodies do. It grows heavy. The eyes close without asking permission. The breath deepens and slows, and the thing you were attending to, the wall, the silence, the vast interior, begins to drift behind a curtain of ordinary dreaming. Bodhidharma, the story says, was not willing to let this happen. He was not going to allow sleep to take him from the practice he had given his life to, so he did what is perhaps the most dramatic thing a person can do in the face of drowsiness. He cut off his own eyelids. They fell to the ground, and where they fell, the first tea plants grew. This is why monks have tea to keep them alert during long meditation. This is why tea exists at all, carried from that cave in Henan province, outward, across centuries and cultures, until it became, quietly, the most widely consumed beverage on earth after water. All of it, the story says, from 2 small pieces of skin that fell onto the earth of Mount Song sometime in the 5th or 6th century. Take a breath here and let the image settle, because it is a remarkable image. The sacrifice of the very organs of seeing in the service of an interior, seeing that needs no eyes. There is something almost mythically perfect about it. The man who spent 9 years gazing at a wall, and who in the end gave away the lids that would have made that gazing comfortable. But the scholars are clear, this is a late folk legend. It has no early textual basis. It does not appear in the Shugao Seng Zhuan, the continued biographies of eminent monks compiled by Daoxuan around 645 CE, which is the second oldest surviving source about Bodhidharma, and the text that first attaches the word biguan, wall-gazing, to his name. It is not in the Luoyang Qilanji, which is the oldest source of all. It is not in the Eru Sixing Lun, the 2 entrances and 4 practices, which is the body of teaching most plausibly connected to the historical man. It appears to be, as scholars of Chan categorize it, a much later invention. East Asian in origin, folk in character, carrying a poetic logic that belongs to the storytelling tradition rather than the documentary record, which does not mean it has no value. A tradition that teaches through parables, that deliberately built its identity around the kind of knowing that cannot be fully captured in written scripture, has always understood that a story can carry truth without being a historical report. The eyelid legend is a parable about what it costs to stay awake. It is a way of saying this man gave everything to the wakefulness he was trying to sustain. It uses the dramatic to say the true. We can receive that and still know that the dramatic is the frame, not the fact. There is a quieter version of the same wisdom in the 4 practices, which ask nothing of your eyelids and everything of your willingness to sit with difficulty without flinching. That is the harder ask in the end, and it does not require a legend. Let us take a slow, deep breath. Notice the quiet in this room. Notice the weight of the body settling. And when you are ready, we will continue together. The next image is the empty tomb. Bodhidharma died, or was said to have died, around 528 CE, though some accounts give the year as 536. The range of dates, even here at the end, reflects the same uncertainty that has attended every stage of his story. The manner of his death in the hagiographic accounts is itself layered with the logic of a life lived beyond ordinary scale. There is a poisoning narrative, not one attempt, but several. Rivals, unnamed, are said to have tried to poison him over the course of his time in China and to have failed repeatedly. 6 times, some versions say. And then the 7th time came and he was said to have accepted it. Not because he was defeated, but because in the framing of the legend, his work was complete. The transmission had been made. Huike had received the robe and the bowl, the outward signs of the passing of the lineage. There was nothing left to do. So he did not resist the poison this time. He allowed it to work. This is hagiography, the writing of a saint's life in the service of the tradition rather than the service of the archive. It carries a recognizable shape, the extraordinary person who cannot be killed until they choose to be, who exits on their own terms, whose death is itself an act of teaching. We find this pattern across many traditions, in many cultures, in many centuries. The shape of the story reveals what the tradition needed to say about this man, that he was sovereign over his own ending, that nothing was taken from him that he had not freely given. What actually happened in the cave on Mount Song, or in the monastery, or wherever Bodhidharma's body finally ceased its long, extraordinary labor, this we do not know. The oldest sources are largely silent. The later sources speak in the idiom of devotion. He was buried. A tomb was made, as tombs are made, to mark the place where a body has returned to the earth. And then the account of Song Yun arrives, and everything shifts. Song Yun was an official. He had been traveling to the western regions, the accounts say, on some errand of the state. And on his return journey, somewhere in the mountains of Central Asia, far from China, far from Shaolin, he passed a man on the road. The man was walking west back toward whatever origin lay in that direction. He was carrying a staff, and hanging from the staff was a single sandal. Song Yun recognized him. He recognized Bodhidharma, the monk, already buried, already gone, walking west with one shoe. Song Yun returned to court and told the story. Those who heard it were troubled enough, or curious enough, to go to the tomb and open it. And when they opened it, they found it empty. Nothing inside, nothing that is, except for one sandal, the mate to the shoe on the staff, left behind as though to say, he was here and now he is not, and this small leather thing is the only evidence remaining. The motif is luminous. One sandal going west, one sandal left in the earth. the man divided between worlds or between directions, belonging fully to neither, transcending the burial that was supposed to have ended him, returning to the West, to India, to whatever origin preceded all the teaching and the crossing and the years of stillness, and leaving only a trace behind. In the Buddhist framework, this tradition draws on the idea that an extraordinary teacher might not be fully contained by death has deep roots. The lamp transmission literature, the Jingde Chuandeng Lu, compiled by Dao Yuan in 1004 CE, roughly 5 centuries after Bodhidharma is supposed to have lived, is the text that collects and preserves and solidifies many of these accounts. It is the great gathering of the lineage stories, the place where the Song dynasty understanding of Chan crystallized around its founding figures, and in that gathering the empty tomb and the single sandal have their place. They are late hagiography. They are the tradition saying, this man was not like other men, his ending was not like ordinary endings. The sand closed over ordinary teachers, but not over him. What they preserve underneath the miraculous image is something true about how Chan thought about its founder. He was the one who came from elsewhere, from outside, from the West, from the vast Indian tradition that predated China's Buddhism. He arrived, he transmitted, he left. The direction of travel was always already back toward the source, back toward the origin of the thing he was carrying. The single sandal is a way of saying that the journey was never finished, that what he brought to China was always pointing beyond China, always pointing toward whatever nameless origin the teaching comes from. You don't need to believe in the empty tomb to receive what it is saying. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a long, slow breath. Notice what the body feels like right now, how it holds the weight of these stories, how some of them settle into you and some of them float. Let everything be exactly as it is. When you are ready, we will continue. Now we arrive at the constructed frame that holds the whole edifice together. Bodhidharma is traditionally counted as the 28th patriarch in the line that descends from the Buddha himself. From the Buddha to Mahakashyapa, from Mahakashyapa down through a succession of 27 Indian teachers, each handing the transmission to the next in an unbroken human chain until it arrived in Bodhidharma's hands and he carried it by sea to China. There he becomes the first patriarch of Chan, the one who brought the flame west to east, who planted the Indian root in Chinese soil, from which it would eventually send branches across the sea to Japan, to Korea, to Vietnam, and finally outward across the world. This is a beautiful genealogy. It gives Chan an unimpeachable pedigree, a direct lineage from the moment of the Buddha's first wordless transmission, when he held up the flower and Mahakashyapa alone smiled, recognizing in the gesture what could not be said. All of that understanding carried person to person, generation to generation, 28 hands passing the lamp until it arrived in China. The scholar John McRae, whose work, Seeing Through Zen, is one of the foundational studies of Chan history, is clear about what this lineage is. It is a construction. The list of 28 patriarchs was assembled and revised over centuries, adjusted as the needs of the tradition changed, designed to anchor the school in an authority that no competing school could question. The choice of 28 was not arrived at immediately. Earlier versions of the list counted differently. The list was a living document, revised in the service of legitimacy rather than discovered in the service of history. This does not mean Chan is fraudulent. Every tradition builds its authority through the stories it tells about its origins. The question is what the tradition does with that authority once it has established it, and what truths it carries forward under the protection of the origin story. Chan carried forward something genuine, a way of attending to experience, a discipline of direct seeing, a culture of inquiry that could not be reduced to doctrine or ritual alone. The 28 patriarch genealogy is the scaffolding. What stands inside the scaffolding is real. But the scaffolding is worth seeing clearly because it tells you something important about how Chan understood itself. A tradition that needed a lineage back to the Buddha was a tradition that needed to say, this is not a new invention. This is not a human idea about how to meditate. This is the original transmission, unbroken, living in the bodies of these teachers across the centuries. The constructed genealogy is a claim about the nature of wisdom, that it is not made up, but passed on. And then there is the slogan. If you have encountered any writing about Zen or Chan, you have almost certainly encountered these words in some form, a special transmission outside the scriptures, not relying on words and letters, pointing directly at the human mind. Seeing one's nature and becoming a Buddha. In Chinese, Jiao Wai Bie Chuan, Bu Li Wen Zi, Jiji Ren Xin, Jian Xing Cheng Fo. These 4 lines are attributed to Bodhidharma. They are treated as his declaration, his founding statement, the sentence that explains why Chan is different from every other form of Buddhism. They appear on the walls of Zen centers. They are quoted in introductions to Zen literature. They are the banner of the school, and they were not written until approximately 600 years after Bodhidharma died. The scholars, McRae, Bernard Farr, in his studies of Chan rhetoric and identity, are consistent on this point. The 4-line formulation is a Song dynasty construction. It crystallizes somewhere in the 11th or 12th century, in the same period that the Jingde Chuandeng Lu and the Blue Cliff Record were being compiled, the great Song dynasty project of giving Chan its definitive literary shape. The slogan was then retrojected backward, attributed to the founder, made to look like the first word rather than the last summary. This is a kind of profound historical irony. The school that defined itself by not relying on words and letters produced, in its Song dynasty maturity, an extraordinary literary tradition, the Bian Lu, the transmission of the lamp texts, the koan collections. And it did so in the name of a founder who, the earliest records suggest, left almost no words at all. The slogan about transcending scripture was added to the tradition that barely had a scripture. The silence of the historical Bodhidharma was filled in, retrospectively, with the articulation of why the silence was the right way. And now we arrive at what might be the deepest and strangest thing about this whole story. The payoff of the loop that was opened at the very beginning, when we said, if the oldest record shows none of the famous story, where did it all come from? Chan is a tradition that built its identity around a transmission outside the scriptures, a knowing that passes between minds in ways that cannot be fully reduced to written instruction, to doctrine, to the accumulated commentary of generations of scholars. And its founder, the man this tradition claims as its origin point, left almost nothing in writing. The earliest source that mentions him at all does not mention wall-gazing or teachings or a school. It mentions an old foreign monk looking up at a golden tower. The one body of teaching most plausibly connected to him, the Eru Sixing Lun, the 2 entrances and 4 practices, is a brief and practical text. Not a systematic philosophy, not a comprehensive treatise, not the kind of thing you build an institution on. So the tradition was given, at its origin, a silence, and it chose to treat that silence not as a problem, but as a proof. The founder left no comprehensive scripture because the transmission does not work through scripture. The founder's biography is uncertain because the person is less important than the pointing. The wall-gazing that may have been a metaphor for a mental state becomes, in the hands of the later tradition, a physical image of absolute commitment. And the physical image carries the metaphor better than any explanation of the metaphor could. The legend is not a corruption of the history. The legend is the history doing what this tradition says all genuine transmission does, getting the point across by a route that bypasses the surface of the words. This is what the Song dynasty lineage builders understood, and this is what they were doing when they wrote the slogan and attributed it backward. They were completing what the silence had begun. They were saying, "Look at this man who barely spoke, who sat still and said nothing for years, who met the emperor with 3 words and a refusal to be pinned down." This is what we mean. This is the teaching. The teacher's absence from the historical record is itself the instruction. A tradition built on the impossibility of full verbal transmission needed a founder who could not be fully verbally captured. The legend filled the silence on purpose, and then the silence traveled. Chan, the Chinese word that comes from the Sanskrit dhyana, which means something like meditation or meditative absorption, the sustained turning of attention toward the ground of the mind. Chan had been in China for centuries when it finally crossed the water to Japan. The crossing did not happen once, it happened twice, carried by 2 different men in 2 different centuries, producing 2 lineages that exist to this day. Eisai, his full name, Myoan Eisai, was a Japanese monk who traveled to Song China twice, studying the tradition at its source. On his second return, around 1191, he brought back the Rinzai line. The Japanese word Rinzai is the reading of the Chinese Linji, named for the great Tang dynasty Chan master Linji Yixuan, whose teaching style was direct, vigorous, sometimes shocking. Linji was the master who was said to shout at students and strike them with a stick, not out of cruelty, but to break the habitual patterns of thought that a polite, graduated instruction would only reinforce. The shock was the gift. Eisai planted this line in Japan, and Rinzai Zen took root there, developing its own culture of koan practice, the use of apparently impossible questions like, "What is the sound of one hand?" or the mukoan as objects of sustained, penetrating attention. Then Dogen. Eihai Dogen, one of the most extraordinary minds in the history of Japanese thought, traveled to Song China and returned around 1227, bringing the Soto line. Soto in Japanese is the reading of Cao Dong in Chinese, a lineage with a different emphasis, less dramatic, more deeply anchored in the practice of shikantaza, which means something like just sitting. Sitting itself as the full expression of enlightenment, not a means to some other end. Dogen's Shobogenzo, the treasury of the true Dharma eye, is among the most intellectually demanding spiritual texts ever written, a sustained exploration of time, being, and the nature of practice that has been studied and debated in Japan for 800 years. Both of these men, Eisai and Dogen, the Rinzai line and the Soto line, traced their transmission back through the Chinese patriarchs, through the Tang masters, through the Northern Way and the cave on Mount Song, to the first patriarch of Chan in China, to Bodhidharma, to Dharmo, to the Indian monk who, in the oldest record we have, stood before the Yongning Pagoda in Luoyang around the early 6th century, chanting quietly, pressing his palms together, telling the monks who listened that in 150 years of wandering he had never seen anything so beautiful. From that old man before that golden tower, whether he was Persian or South Indian, whether his name in Sanskrit meant the Dharma of enlightenment, or whether the name carried slightly different resonances before it was translated and retranslated, from that moment, in the account of the tradition, to the stone gardens of Kyoto and the meditation halls of Aiheiji Monastery in the Japanese mountains, is roughly 700 years. 2 sea crossings, dozens of transmitted lines, hundreds of teachers, millions of practitioners. The word Zen, which now circulates globally in ways that range from the profound to the decorative, is the Japanese reading of Chan, which is the Chinese reading of Dhyana, which is Sanskrit for a particular quality of sustained, undivided, deeply settled attention. At each stage of translation, something new grew around the core. At each stage, the core remained. Let us take a breath, long and slow. Notice how the body has its own wisdom about when to pause, how it knows to breathe without being told. And now, finally, gently, the doll. Bodhidharma, the ascetic, who may have been Persian, who may have been South Indian, who may have come by sea or by the northern land routes, who meditated until his shadow burned into a stone, the stone is there on Mount Song, you can see it, who told an emperor he had earned no merit, who told a disciple that the mind could not be found and therefore was already at peace. This man, across the 1400 or so years since he is thought to have lived, underwent one more transformation. He became a toy, a round, red, eyeless toy, weighted at the bottom so it always rights itself when knocked over, sold at temple fairs, kept on shelves in homes and offices, given as gifts at the new year and at the start of new projects and new intentions. The Daruma doll, Daruma being the Japanese pronunciation of the Sanskrit Bodhidharma, is said to have lost the use of its arms and legs from sitting for 9 years, which is why it has no limbs, only a round body and a solemn bearded face. When you acquire one, you paint in one eye while setting a goal. When the goal is achieved, or when the year turns, depending on the tradition, you paint in the other eye, and the doll is complete. A man who may have stared at a wall for 9 years, or who used wall-gazing as a name for a practice of radical interior stillness, became a limbless good luck charm you paint to make wishes come true. There is something that could seem like mockery in that arc, a slow diminishment from the austere and the overwhelming to the commercial and the cheerful. But if you sit with it, another possibility opens. The Daruma doll is a teaching device in its own right. The one blind eye says the intention is incomplete. The world is not yet what it could be. The process is unfinished. And the completion, when it comes, when the second eye is painted, is an act of witness, of saying this is what was wished for, and this is what arrived, and these two things are now in relationship with each other, acknowledged and honored. The man who told the emperor that vast emptiness contains nothing holy would perhaps have found something to appreciate in the object that bears his name. A round vessel, weighted to return to uprightness no matter how many times it falls. Empty of arms and legs and therefore of all the grasping and striving those limbs represent, awaiting the completion that can only come when the intention and the result have both been present. It is a 400-year telephone game from a Central Asian ascetic to a wish-granting toy. Something was lost in translation. Something too was found. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the breath go where it wants to go. There is nothing to hold on to tonight, and nothing to lose. We have come a long way together in this telling. We began with the oldest thing we actually know, the record written by Yang Xuanji around 547 CE, where an old foreign monk stood before the golden jewel tower of the Yongning Temple in Luoyang, claimed to be 150 years old, and chanted quietly with his palms pressed together for days. No wall, no Shaolin, no disciples with severed arms. Just an old man and a beautiful tower and the sound of a name being offered up to the sky. We met the uncertainty of his origin. Persian in the oldest account, South Indian Brahmin in the next, the homeland already contested in the two most reliable documents. The geography of his life dissolved before we can even properly begin it. We met the word biguan, wall-gazing or wall contemplation, appearing first in the Shu Gaoseng Zhuan of Daoxuan in 645 CE, probably describing a quality of mind, make the mind like a wall, before it became the cinematic 9-year vigil in the physical cave on Mount Song that the Jingde Chuandeng Lu of 1004 CE gives us in its full form. And we stood, in imagination, before the cave that pilgrims still visit, the shadow stone that still rests in the monastery, knowing them for what they are, veneration, not evidence, and valuable precisely because of what they tell us about how a tradition cares for its own memory. We heard that Shaolinsi on Mount Song in Henan province, was founded not for Bodhidharma but for another Indian monk, Batuo, also called Bodhidharma, around 495 or 496 CE under Emperor Shaowen of the Northern Wei. That Bodhidharma's connection to the monastery came later through the tradition's gravity, pulling everything toward its founding figure. And we heard that the Yijin Jing, the muscle tendon change classic that is supposed to represent his gift of martial arts to the monks of Shaolin, is a text that Tang Hao and the scholar Meir Shahar have dated to approximately 1624 CE, with a forged preface in Bodhidharma's name, attaching to him, retroactively, a physical teaching he almost certainly never gave. We sat with the Emperor Wu of Liang Wudi, the great Buddhist patron, and we heard the 3 answers that became the first case of the Blue Cliff record. The Bian Lu assembled around 1125 CE. No merit. Vast emptiness, nothing holy. I don't know. We tried to feel what those answers were teaching. The refusal to let practice become a new form of accumulation, the insistence that the highest truth cannot be pinned down by any concept, including holy, the embrace of unknowing as the most honest possible account of who and what we are. We held the 4 practices, the Eru Sixing Lun, the 2 entrances and 4 practices, preserved in the Dunhuang manuscripts, and considered by scholars the most plausible, authentic material connected to the historical man. Requite hatred, Bao Yuan Xing. Hold difficulty without bitterness, understand it as the working out of causes you yourself have set in motion. Adapt to conditions, Sui Yuan Xing. Meet the world as it actually is, not as you wished or feared it would be. Seek nothing, Wu Suo Qiu Xing. Practice without the agenda of what the practice should produce. Accord with the Dharma, Cheng Fa Xing. Act from the understanding you have, without clinging even to that understanding. 4 lines, no eyelids, no wall as spectacle, just a careful, gentle, extraordinarily demanding map of how to hold a human life. We sat in the snow with Huike, the second patriarch, and we heard the exchange that Chan considers one of its heartbeats. Bring me your mind, and I will pacify it. I have searched for it, and I cannot find it. There, I have already pacified it, the impossibility and the completion arriving simultaneously. The mind that was supposed to be brought forward and found absent turned out to be the very thing the practice was always trying to reveal. We heard the eyelid story, the lids cut off to prevent sleep, the first tea plants growing where they fell. And we met it for what it is, late folk legend, not in any early text, beautiful as a parable about the cost of sustained wakefulness, not to be confused with biography. We stood before the empty tomb and the single sandal. Song Yun returning from the western regions and encountering a dead man walking westward carrying one shoe, the other shoe left in the open tomb, the body itself gone. We let the image say what it was trying to say, that this man belonged to a direction, that the direction was always already outward and beyond, that something remained and something had already returned to wherever it came from. We noted the poisoning narrative, the 7 attempts, the final acceptance as hagiography, the tradition's way of saying the ending was chosen and sovereign, not suffered and accidental. We saw the 28 patriarch lineage for what John McCrae's scholarship tells us it is, a constructed pedigree revised across centuries, designed to give the school an unbroken authority tracing back to the Buddha himself. Not fraudulent. Every tradition does something like this, but a construction worth seeing clearly, because seeing it clearly shows you what the tradition was claiming about the nature of wisdom. We heard the great slogan, Jiao Wai Bie Chuan, Bu Li Wen Zi, Ji Ji Ren Xin, Jian Xing Cheng Fo. A special transmission outside the scriptures, not relying on words and letters, pointing directly at the human mind, seeing one's nature and becoming a Buddha. And we learned that it was written in the Song dynasty, somewhere around the 11th or 12th century, attributed backward to the founder, completing in words the statement about the limits of words that the founder's silence had already made. And we understood perhaps why the silence had to be filled this way. A tradition built on the transmission that escapes the text needed a founder who barely produced a text. The thinness of the historical Bodhidharma, the near absence, the contested homeland, the legends that grew to fill the space he left, is not a flaw in the story. It is the engine of it. The legend grew because the silence invited it. The silence was the teaching, the legend was the tradition completing the silence with the most honest image it could find for the thing words cannot fully hold. And then the chain moved through the Tang masters, through the Song codification, across the sea with Eisai carrying the Rinzai line to Japan around 1191, across the sea again with Dogen carrying the Soto line around 1227. The Sanskrit dhyana became the Chinese Chan, and then the Japanese Zen, and the Japanese Zen became slowly, unevenly, in the 20th century especially, something that circulates now in languages that would have been unimaginable to anyone who stood before the Yongning Pagoda in 6th century Luoyang. The word sits on coffee mugs and above the doors of wellness studios and in the titles of books about productivity. It is the inevitable fate of living ideas when they move through many cultures over very long stretches of time. The core keeps traveling, the surface accumulates, and at one end of that chain, at the very beginning of it, or at the end that the tradition calls the beginning, knowing that in another telling, the beginning was in India, or in the wordless moment under the Bodhi tree, or before time began, there is a man before a wall, or a man in front of a quality of mind that a later tradition chose to call a wall, or an old monk before a golden tower in Luoyang, pressing his palms together, chanting quietly, looking up. The round red doll with the painted eye waited to rise after every fall, waiting for its other eye to be given when the intention is complete. This is where he arrived. From the cave on Mount Song to the temple fair in Edo period Japan. From Biguan to Daruma. From the Eru Sixing Lun to a toy maker's shop. The telephone game lasted 400 years and produced something that still teaches in its own way, in the form it arrived in. You will be knocked over. You will right yourself. The I is waiting. The completion is possible. There is nothing left to remember from tonight. If something stayed with you, the empty tomb, the 4 practices, the question about your own mind that you cannot quite locate, let that be enough. Let it settle somewhere quiet and sleep alongside you. It does not need to be held. It does not need to be carried carefully through the night. It already knows where to go. We have met an old monk before a golden tower in Luoyang, claiming to be 150 years old. We have met the wall, the instruction to make the mind a wall, and the cave where stone still holds what the tradition said was his shadow. We have met an emperor told he had earned nothing, and a disciple told that the mind he wished to be calmed could not be found. We have met the text from Dunhuang with its 4 careful ways of moving through difficulty. We have met the empty tomb, the single sandal, the long chain that ended in Japan, and the round red doll that watches from 1,000 shelves waiting for its second eye. You do not need to remember any of it. And if one moment from this telling stayed with you, if one image settled somewhere in the body and became not a thought, but a kind of knowing, let that be the gift of the night. Let the rest drift down like the snow that falls without asking anything of what it covers. Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.